Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Hi there, welcome to Brazier. Fast-paced news from 4 until 6. In the next hour, questions we'll try to answer for you. Why are thousands of us facing the prospect of having to cancel summer holidays because of a huge backlog in the processing of passports? Does it have anything to do with civil servants working from home? Also, what lies behind an attempt by GPs to cut the length of their working day by 2.5 hours? How would that affect your chances of seeing a family doctor? And legal migration, why have almost 1 million immigrants arrived in the UK since Brexit, or Britain voted to leave the EU? Nigeria and Pakistan leading the charge of students and key workers bound for the UK. We'll unpick those figures for you. Also, a breaking story this hour, the last few minutes in fact, in the Irish Sea. There's a P&O ferry seemingly adrift. The lifeboat, 3 lifeboats in fact, have been called in with question marks about P&O's safety record in that part of the world between Cairnryan and Larne in Northern Ireland. We'll bring you a live report on that story as it develops throughout the course of this afternoon. Alongside me throughout today's show, the writer and campaigner Laura Dodsworth. But first, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Well, to give you more on that breaking news story, in the last half hour, 3 RNLI lifeboats are tugging a P&O ferry that was adrift off the coast of Northern Ireland. The vessel was travelling from Cairnryan and is roughly 5 miles off the coast of its destination of Larne. P&O has tweeted saying the ship has been affected by a mechanical issue. More on that detailed story when we get it. Now, police have officially identified the 4 family members who were stabbed to death in south-east London on Monday. Dolly Hill and her partner Denton Burke were both killed at their home in Bermondsey on Monday. Miss Hill's 45-year-old daughter, Tanisha Ofiri Akefu, and her 27-year-old granddaughter, Samantha Drummond, also died. A 28-year-old man from Lewisham, who's suspected of carrying out the fatal attack, is in hospital but in a stable condition. In international news, Russia says if London encourages Ukraine to strike targets on Russian territory, it will lead to a proportionate response. That's according to Russian state media. UK Defence Minister James Heappey said earlier it would be acceptable for Ukrainian forces to use Western weapons to attack military targets on Russian soil. Russia has already accused NATO of waging a proxy war with Moscow by arming Ukraine. But the UK Armed Forces Minister, James Heappey, says individual countries are supplying military aid, not NATO.
NATO is reinforcing the alliance's eastern flank as a defensive measure to reassure our Eastern European allies. NATO is not the donor community. Many of the people in the donor community are NATO countries, but similarly, Australians, the Kiwis and others are part of it as well.
Well, meanwhile, the Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has dismissed Ukraine's proposal to hold peace talks in Mariupol, saying it's too early to talk about mediation. The comments came after a meeting with UN Secretary-General in Moscow. Antonio Guterres says ceasefire in Ukraine should be created as soon as possible.
The United Nations is ready to fully mobilise its human and logistical resources to help save lives in Mariupol. My proposal is for a coordinated work of the United Nations, the International Committee of the Red Cross, and Ukraine and Russian Federation forces to enable...
Here, police searches are ongoing in rural Lancashire for a missing woman believed to have been kidnapped. 33-year-old Katie Kenyon from Burnley hasn't been seen since last Friday morning. Lancashire police have been given more time to question a 50-year-old man arrested on suspicion of kidnap. Police have issued a photograph of a white transit van as well, which Miss Kenyon is believed to have travelled in with a man, and have urged anyone with any information to come forward. The Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, has hit out at how his deputy has been treated after an article was published in the Mail on Sunday. An anonymous Conservative MP was quoted as saying that Angela Rayner used her legs to distract Boris Johnson during Prime Minister's questions. The Speaker of the House of Commons, who's meeting the editor of the Mail on Sunday, has described it as misogynist and offensive. Sir Keir Starmer says a culture of change is needed in politics.
She's a formidable politician, a brilliant politician, and this is just disgusting, rank sexism, rank misogyny. And it's not just Angela that faces this, lots of women in politics too, and that's why obviously we need to call out anybody involved in this, but we need a culture change as well.
Well, the Prime Minister is due to chair a committee to tackle the cost of living crisis in the coming weeks. Downing Street says a number of ideas were discussed during a cabinet meeting this morning, which will feed into a more formal process. Boris Johnson, who's hinted that parents could receive more childcare support, wants ministers to come up with ways to ease financial pressures on households without relying on new government spending. Now, hundreds of people have lined the streets of a town in Cornwall for the funeral of D-Day veteran Harry Billinge. Mr Billinge was 18 years old when he landed on Gold Beach during the Normandy invasion in 1944. He was made an MBE 2 years ago after raising more than £50,000 to build a memorial honouring his fallen comrades. The 96-year-old died early this month and was described as having a winning smile. You're with GBNews. More news as it happens. Now it's time for Brazier.
At 6 minutes past 4, let's just bring you up to speed on what's going on in the Irish Sea. And we'll start with that breaking story. It's a P&O ferry operates between Larne and Cairn Ryan. It seems to be adrift off the coast of Larne, if reports are believed, about 5 miles off the coast of Larne. It's a vessel called the European Causeway. We're told it can carry up to 410 passengers, as I say, about 5 miles from Larne Harbour in Northern Ireland. We've got a screen image which we'll try and show you. It's from Vessel Finder. showing the location of shipping, and this particular vessel's location. We're struggling to access that right now, but it confirms what's been reported, that it's about 5 miles from Larne. The vessel left Cairn Ryan, we're told, at about midday, was due to arrive at Larne Harbour at around 2 this afternoon. P&O, they say the incident occurred due to a mechanical problem during the course of the voyage. There you go. There's the website that shows you where the vessel is alongside others. Full inspection, say P&O, will take place when the ship is back in port, they added. Tugs from Larne and from Belfast have been deployed to guide her back to port, according to P&O. An RNLI lifeboat from Larne and Red Bay launched to help the vessel as well. There's been a response from the RMT union. It's fairly striking. Let me read it to you. P&O Ferries, this is the RMT union, and their paymasters in Dubai are no longer capable of running a safe service and should be stripped of the licence to operate their ships. A cursory glance through the news archives tells us that on Sunday, a sister vessel of the European Causeway failed an inspection by the Maritime Agency. The RMT say there are problems at P&O related to their recent changing of the guard, as it were, the sacking of staff and the re-employment of foreign nationals to run their vessels. There's no suggestion, at least not at this stage, that there's any connection between those two events, so the RMT are joining the dots. So if you're just switching on, a vessel without power in the Irish Sea, not a particularly good idea, between Larne and Cairn Ryan, and it's being tugged, we're told, back to Larne, we presume, given its location. The lifeboat service is involved, at least 3 lifeboats currently involved there. As soon as we know more on what's happening there, we'll bring it to you. Also going to be talking to Simon Calder, the travel writer, who may be able to shed some... in fact, there he is. He's arrived sooner than expected. Simon Calder, welcome to you. I know we're going to talk about passports later on, but since you're there by serendipity, we thought we'd ask you about this story. Anything to worry about, you think?
Oh, no, no danger to anybody. I'm very, very optimistic about that. This seems to be just a mechanical engine failure. However, I am looking out right now across beautiful Belfast Harbour. Larne is about 15 miles along the coast from here. It is a fine, clear day, very light winds. I cannot see that there would be any danger to anybody. It will be towed in. Now, just to put this into perspective, we are now almost 6 weeks since P&O Ferries, completely out of the blue, decided to make all their crew redundant and bring in lower cost agency staff. Since then, many of its ships have been out of commission, suspended, but they have recently returned to the Cairn Ryan to Larne route, which is the shortest vehicle crossing between Northern Ireland and Scotland. And my kind of expectation is that we will find that this is just one of those annoying mechanical failures. As I say, no danger to human life, as far as I can see from the facts as we know them. But of course, hugely embarrassing. Whatever the cause was, it just focuses more attention. And the statement you read out from the RMT union kind of reinforces the fact that this will convince many people that P&O Ferries has behaved very badly and that its ships shouldn't be sailing. But the Maritime and Coast Guard Agency, which cleared the ships, said that it was okay to keep going, and so we will find out in due course. Meanwhile, as I say, it seems pretty calm out on the water, and I imagine that the ship will be tied up in Larne. If you're booked on European Causeway, well, be prepared, obviously, for some disruption. There will be an investigation by the maritime authorities into what went wrong, because even though at this time of day on a Tuesday, it's unlikely to have a significantly high number of passengers on board. Anything where you have a ship quoted as being adrift out of the captain's control is extremely concerning.
Simon, thanks so much for that snap reaction. I'm just going to introduce the story you were booked to talk about, and we'll come back to you straight away. For years, it was Britain's proud boast that our civil service was the best in the world. Nobody did it better. A Rolls-Royce public service. But that claim wearing thin. Think of recent events at the DVLA, for instance, but also consider passports. Today we learned that millions of us face huge delays in having them renewed. Before COVID, you could expect to have your passport returned to you in 3 weeks. Now it's more like 10. Some people have been waiting 5 months and more. Summer holidays are in jeopardy for hundreds of thousands of Britons. COVID is getting the blame, and indirectly, I suppose, you, the public, because during lockdown we didn't renew passports because we weren't travelling. But might it be true that civil servants working from home are also part of the problem? Up to 3/4 of public sector employees continue to work remotely, with many resistant to the idea of giving up what some now see as a right to work from home. We don't know that, we can speculate. Let's return to the travel writer Simon Calder for his thoughts. Simon, to passports then, big delays. Public weren't travelling during COVID. I fell foul of this recently myself for my son, who's going to travel to Italy this summer, and I looked and thought, oh, you've only got less time. You need more time, rather, on your passport. You've got to make sure it's not in danger of running out of date if you want to travel. So I've sent it off. I hope, fingers crossed, it'll be OK. We've got months, but others won't be so lucky.
No, and this is an absolutely shocking story from several points of view. It's now 2 years this week, Colin, since I wrote to the Home Office and I said, I tell you what, I'm getting really worried about the number of passports that will have expired during lockdown, and I need to know what arrangements you are making for the inevitable surge in the number of applications. Now, at the time, 2 years ago, I was told, everyone's working from home. We're advising people to defer their passport applications, which actually increased the problem now. It is unbelievable that, given that the government made all the decisions about easing travel restrictions, that the Home Office, which runs the passport service, wasn't in the room and didn't say, OK, this is going to mean we are going to get a surge of applications. We calculate whatever it is, and I'm going to guess 7 or 8 million passports expired during the COVID pandemic. We're going to get an awful lot of renewals and new applications. We better be staffed up, prepared for that. And it appears that they're not. And to make matters, Colin, even worse, what the government is doing in terms of misinterpreting the European passport rules is absolutely outrageous. I'm going to show you my passport. This is a perfectly valid document. It was issued, like many passports, for 10 years and 9 months to take account of unspent validity when I last renewed it. It was issued on the 23rd of May. That means I can go into the European Union anytime up to the 22nd of May, because that will be the day before its 10th birthday. I can then stay there for 3 months. Now, the government is saying they don't know what the rule is, even though I have sent them all the official correspondence from the Department of Migration and Home Affairs in Brussels. Their misinterpretation, willful or not, I don't know, has been seized upon by a couple of budget airlines, EasyJet and Ryanair. They are making nonsense statements about what the rules are for passport validity, which bear no correlation at all with reality. Furthermore, they are denying boarding to people who are perfectly entitled to travel, who are in many cases switching to Jet2 or to British Airways, because those companies are perfectly happy to take people who meet the European Union's requirements. Yet, while this is happening, while the airlines are saying your passport's run out, it won't work, that is increasing the pressure on the passport service, because loads of people whose passport, like mine, I'm going to be using that for the next 4 weeks to get into Europe. That's absolutely fine. But loads of people will think, oh, no, your passport's not valid. I'm going to have to get a new one, and they'll get in the queue as well, gumming up the system. It is a huge shame on the government and on the airlines that are misinterpreting the rules.
Simon Calder, keep that passport safe. You won't get another one for a while, that's for sure. Really appreciate your time. Thanks a lot. Laura Dodsworth is with me. A bit of a scandal brewing.
What about the passport?
Yes.
Well, the incredibly frustrating thing about this is that when the government took the unprecedented decision to flatten the curve and lock us down, didn't think about all the other consequences. Here we have yet another unintended but yet quite foreseeable consequence of
Simon Calder foresaw it, yeah.
Well, of course, Simon Calder saw it. You know, that's his business, it's his expertise. Why do we have such an enormous civil service if they can't get the basics right? I think Jacob Rees-Mogg needs to go to the passport offices and leave some of those very neat and politely worded notes on the desks and encourage people back. I am waiting for a passport too in my own household.
And do we think, we don't know, do we? We don't know that the fact that the civil servants are working from home is contributing to this problem. We don't know that for sure.
Oh, come on, it's obvious. I mean, we don't know. Look, there's two things. There's a bottleneck because people didn't bother renewing passports when they couldn't travel. And yet, as that bottleneck was predicted, staffing resource should have been made available as lockdown eased to deal with it. So that's inexcusable. I think blaming the British public for the government's own inefficiency and lack of planning is not on. And yes, I'm sure not working from home pays, it pays a consequence. Yeah. If they were there, they'd be more accountable. It just doesn't make sense. Of course they need to get back to the office.
Yeah, amen to that. And let's hope they do in numbers. Laura, for now, thanks very much indeed. I'm just going to tell you a bit about the European causeway that's been adrift, P&O Ferry adrift between Dumfries and Galloway, Scotland, southern Scotland, and Larne, Northern Ireland. I'm reliably informed she's now back at Larne Harbour, having been towed there and escorted by no fewer than 3 lifeboats. The RMT unions say this might have something to do with the fact that P&O have got rid of a lot of experienced staff. We'll see what P&O ferries have to say about that. They say there was a mechanical failure. The vessel lost power. Not a brilliant idea in the Irish Sea. You might assume that the number of people arriving in Britain as immigrants is falling. Yes, there's a crisis in the Channel with the boats there, but the numbers involved in the Channel, though they're tripling every year, did start from a very, very low base, obviously. Far bigger numbers, we presume, have returned to the EU during lockdown or to a lesser degree as a result, say some, of Brexit. But the truth, it seems, is really quite different. Immigration is rising again sharply. Partly that's a result of international events, tens of thousands of Ukrainians fleeing to the UK, along with up to 150,000 Hong Kongers. There's also been a sharp rise in non-EU nationals coming in on student visas and to fill gaps in the labour market, a rise of more than 50% since the EU vote. In other words, an extra 840,000 people in the UK since 2016. Workers and students from Nigeria, Pakistan, Philippines, India, they lead the way. It means that more foreign nationals will come to the UK this year than before Brexit. Joining me now is Stephen Wolfe, the former MEP and Director of the Centre for Migration and Economic Prosperity. Stephen, hi to you. There's obviously we, others, politicians, very focused on events in the Channel. Meanwhile, legal migration has been rocketing.
Absolutely. And this is something that we kind of expected from Boris almost after Brexit, because the rules that they were introducing at the time were not ones that were going to restrict low-skilled wages. It was one that was going to be more open to the UK. Now, I've got to start with this, Colin, in that I welcomed some of the most of the changes that were introduced by the government straight after Brexit. One of the things we campaigned for was an equality of individuals from whatever country they are being able to come and enter the UK to work, study, or live in the long term. And we've certainly seen that. But what has actually happened is that the government has decided that it can replace those who are not coming from the EU from those from the non-EU countries, and in fact has opened the doors to allow much more of that sector to come in, and at wages that are really comparable to those who are just on, 20,000, 22,000. These are deemed reasonable wages for able to bring non-EU citizens in.
And Stephen, that will be the thing that maybe alarms some people. I mean, taking back control of who comes in, filling which labour shortage gaps is fine. But one of the promises of Brexit was that people, low-paid Brits, would not have to compete with other low-paid people coming to the UK from outside, often for a short period of time, to earn lots of money very quickly and therefore not live, pay the accommodation costs, etc., that we face.
Yes, and that is exactly the expectation of most of those people who saw the opportunity to take back control of our borders. As I say, the government has taken back control. There's no doubt about that. But what they have done in a series of policies along this journey since Brexit has enabled immigration to expand. And I will say that to some people, they will see that as a sleight of hand. And on the other hand, they've also expanded the number of programs to enable people to come in for long term. One of the big figures that you will see there is what's called the BNO program to allow Hong Kong citizens who are facing restrictions in Hong Kong under the Chinese government to have visas and be able to come here long term. So far, 155,000 have come, and the government estimate in 5 years, that's going to be around 350,000 people from there. We've also seen the numbers that we expect, the large numbers of Ukrainians, but in the past, we've had resettlement figures from Syria, from Afghans, and of course, we've seen the uncontrolled migration, which we estimate of 80,000 a year from those coming across the channel. Altogether, that is going to put increased pressure on populations because of the sheer numbers of people being able to come in legally and illegally.
Stephen Wolf will explain it very clearly. Appreciate it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Coming up here on GB News, could doctors vote to cut GP opening hours by 2.5 hours a day? First, we've got a break for you.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debate, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Well, some teachers didn't want to teach in classroom during the pandemic. Many civil servants, as we were just discussing, still don't want to stop working from home. And now it seems doctors only want to work office hours. Surgeries currently routinely operate between 8 a.m. and 6:30 p.m, but a vote next month could see hours slashed by 2.5 hours per day, 9 a.m. to 5 p.m. Avon Local Medical Committee, it represents GPs in Bristol, South Gloucestershire and North Somerset, will vote on the plan at the annual conference of UK Local Medical Committees. That's on May the 10th in York. Some areas are seeing record waiting lists. You know that, don't you? Could patients now be kept waiting potentially even longer? Let's turn to Christopher Snowdon, Head of Lifestyle Economics at the IEA. And Christopher Snowdon, when we think of, well, when it comes to lifestyle economics, this is the intersection that we feel the most, isn't it, between something as important as healthcare and the provision of something like opening hours. Just to take their part for a second, Saturday openings coming for family surgeries. Weekday evenings, something's got to give.
Well, yes, but it's not as if GPs are forced to work between 8 o'clock and 6:30. This is just when the surgery can be open or is allowed to be open, or people might expect it to be open in case of emergencies or what have you. So, I mean, the reality is GPs on average are doing the equivalent of 3 days' work a week. It's become a majority part-time profession for various reasons. And I think you can take the GP side up to a point. I mean, clearly, if they were being forced to work between 8 and 6:30 every day, there would be pretty onerous working hours. But the real problem, and I think that the GPs need to read the room with this because they almost seem to be winding up the public, but the real problem is a lack of GPs. And that's exacerbated by the fact that so many are working part-time, which of course is their right. We can't force them to work full-time, but it means we need even more GPs to give people a decent service.
And on that, I mean, there was a report recently suggesting a third of GPs want to retire over the course of the next 5 years. I mean, I'm slightly sceptical of surveys like that. I think there was one recently that said half of teachers wanted to retire in the next 5 years. There might be something in that magic figure of 5 years. If you put it to most people, they'd say, I'd quite like to retire in 5 years. But if true, that is a crisis.
Yes, and GPs have been leaving anyway in large numbers. That's why there are so few of them. And it becomes a vicious circle because GPs, they have a lot of unnecessary paperwork. They're often acting below their pay grade, doing things that other medics could be doing, pharmacists, for example. So I do have a certain amount of sympathy. I mean, they're working in a very broken system. The NHS is an absolute train wreck at the moment, and arguably general practice is the worst part of it. On the other hand, I think they have to take some responsibility for the state of affairs at the moment. Foreign visitors find it absolutely staggering that if you want a same-day appointment with a GP, you have to ring up at 8 o'clock in the morning, along with everybody else who's trying to ring up at 8 o'clock in the morning.
It's nuts. Christopher, it's nuts. But what would you, in 45 seconds, how would you fix it?
I think that the NHS needs to be split into 1,000 pieces, really. The GP surgeries are, of course, private, but they're private with one client. And the customer is not me, it's not you, it's not the patient. The client is effectively the NHS, and that's why they have so much bargaining power with the NHS. Nobody's happy with this system. The GPs don't like the system. The public don't like the system. And I think perhaps we need to be looking at some sort of walk-in system whereby not rather than sending people to A&E, which is effectively what's happening at the moment, let's just have walk-ins. You never see the same doctor twice anyway. The idea of having a family doctor who's going to visit you at the weekend died 20 years ago. So let's just get rid of GPs altogether and have walk-in centres.
Christopher Snowdon, that was just over a fraction of 50 seconds, but good points all. Thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks a lot. Laura Dodsworth alongside me. Laura, when I lived on the continent for some years, I just got used to the idea of walking into a doctor's practice with my little credit card at hand. You got to see that a doctor quickly. It didn't pay much. It was a token sum in Belgium, but the principle was there.
Yeah, I was listening enviously to you and Christopher talking about ringing up a GP 8 a.m. to get an appointment the same day. That's not been possible at my GP practice for a long time.
Wow.
Can't get a same-day appointment, can't even phone them. It's all through an online form. Getting a GP's appointment is as rare as
and if you're a 95-year-old who's not au fait with the interweb, what do you do?
If you call them, you can stay on the line for some interminable length of time and the receptionist will guide the old person through the process, because I checked that. I did wonder. I think at the moment there's this real disparity between the job that GPs think they're doing and the perception that the public has of GPs. My own experience recently, a little anecdote, I had to take my son to A&E with a broken hand. We had to leave. We left A&E with a broken hand, no triage, and went back the next day.
After waiting for how long?
Many hours, and other people were leaving with broken bones. And all that A&E would say to me is because GPs aren't seeing enough people are using accident and emergency like an alternative GP service. I think that reducing the hours from 9 to 5 doesn't fit in with modern life, and if GPs aren't careful, they're going to contribute to their own demise, because we're going to see the rise of more app-based services. Now, that suits some people, But there are some things you really do need to present in person and see a GP for. And working life is not 9 to 5 for everybody.
No, that's all that's true. I'm just going to, since there isn't one here to make their case, I would simply say the last time I went to see a GP, the tempo at which they were working was extraordinary. I mean, just getting through it really quickly. Computer filling in the form, talking to me, and there was going to be a conveyor belt, relentless conveyor belt of patient after patient after patient. So, nobody's saying it's an easy job, which perhaps explains why the average salary is £100,000.
Of course it's not an easy job, and I think that it's beyond GP practices to fix themselves, and therefore everything in the NHS is right. Probably what Christopher said is correct. It needs to be broken up into 1,000 pieces. It's a huge problem, and you can't just look at one part of the NHS in isolation.
OK, Laura, for now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, your chance to talk about Elon Musk. I know you're very excited about that story, in common with many of our viewers. We'll have our daily debate. Is Elon Musk's takeover of Twitter good or bad for democracy? Latest news headlines first.
Colin, thank you. A P&O ferry that had lost power and was adrift off the coast of Northern Ireland has now docked safely at Larne Harbour. A P&O spokesperson said there were no reported injuries on board the ship after the ship had been affected by a mechanical issue earlier on this afternoon. The company said a full independent investigation will now be undertaken. And police have officially identified the 4 family members who were stabbed to death in south-east London on Monday. Dollett Hill, her partner Denton Burke, her daughter Tanisha Oforia-Kufo and her granddaughter Samantha Drummonds were killed at Mrs Hill's home in Bermondsey on Monday. A 28-year-old man from Lewisham who's suspected of carrying out the fatal attack is in hospital himself in a stable condition. Russia says if London encourages Ukraine to strike targets on Russian territory, it will immediately lead to a proportionate response. That's according to Russian state media. And it comes after UK Defence Minister James Heappey said it would be acceptable for Ukrainian forces to use Western weapons to attack military targets on Russian soil. Meanwhile, police searches are ongoing in rural Lancashire for a missing woman believed to have been kidnapped. 33-year-old Katie Kenyon from Burnley hasn't been seen since last Friday morning. Lancashire police have been given more time to question a 50-year-old man arrested on suspicion of kidnapping. And hundreds lined the streets for the funeral of Harry Billinge, the D-Day veteran who raised thousands of pounds to build a national memorial for his fallen comrades. Mr Billinge was just 18 when he landed in Normandy in 1944. He died early this month at the age of 96. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+. You're with GB News. Colin Brazier's back after the break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton Tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Nearly 22 minutes to 5. Twitter has agreed to be bought by the billionaire Elon Musk for $44 billion. You probably know this by now. It's news that's divided opinion, not least on Twitter itself. Musk said that he will unlock the, quote, tremendous potential of the platform and ensure that it protects freedom of speech. Twitter co-founder Jack Dorsey approved the purchase and called Musk the, quote, singular solution I trust. Others say the world's richest man controlling a leading global news and discussion platform is a dangerous concentration of power. And as you can guess, some progressives were in dismay, some reactions, well, you judge, but I think pretty plain amusing, really. Actress and campaigner Jamila Jamil said, he got Twitter. I would like this to be what lies here as my last tweet, just really any excuse to show pics of barreled. Is that right, barreled? Yeah?
I don't know how you pronounce that either, sorry.
That's the words of my guest alongside me, struggling with barreled. I fear this free speech bid is going to help this hell platform reach its final form of totally lawless hate, bigotry and misogyny. Best of luck. The former Democratic presidential candidate Elizabeth Warren, a.k.a. Pocahontas, according to Donald Trump, said, this deal is dangerous for our democracy. Billionaires like Elon Musk play by a different set of rules than everyone else, accumulating power for their own gain. We need a wealth tax and strong rules to hold big tech accountable. The American Black Lives Matter leader Sean King, BLM have been in some trouble, you'll know, recently for how they spend their money, said, at its root, Elon Musk wanting to purchase Twitter is not about left versus right, it's about white power. The man was raised in apartheid by a white nationalist. He's upset that Twitter won't allow white nationalists to target, harass people. That's his definition of free speech. His account was then deleted. Presumably by him. We might laugh, but this poses a serious question. Today we ask, will Musk help democracy as he insists, or threatens democracy as his critics say? Let's debate this. The founder and editor of Compact magazine and a regular contributor here is Sohrab Ahmari, and the journalist and broadcaster, also a regular contributor, Sam Dowler, takes up, we think, what is likely to be a fairly opposite position. Gentlemen, thanks both. Sohrab, what an extraordinary story this has turned out to be. Did you think it was going to happen, a full takeover?
I was quite surprised, but but that price is pretty nice. No matter Jack Dorsey says, "Yay, go for it," he's just pocketed billions of dollars.
Nice work if you can get it, isn't it? So, Rob, did you expect it, and what flows from it, do you think?
Well, I mean, I think if you're the richest man in the world, you can do a lot of things. Just like if you're J.K. Rowling, you can say things that ordinary mortals can't say, given the kind of progressive atmosphere of censorship. My background view, let me put this way, is that I don't want to live in the world in which free speech and the platforms in which democratic deliberation take place are the private fiefs of a few billionaires of whatever political stripe. Ideally, I think that sort of is a symptom of a kind of hyper-privatized world in which we're losing our public sphere to these privatized fiefdoms. That said, given the balance of ideologies and the way that one set of oligarchs, the ones who control much of social media, I'm excluding Elon Musk here, the way they've behaved in concert with, let's say, a professional class kind of progressives to silence speech has been extremely alarming. I mean, I was at the New York Post when the Hunter Biden laptop story was censored by both Twitter and Facebook. And so given the choices that we have, I absolutely far prefer, Elon Musk who seems to really believe in freedom of speech as it's intended versus the current crop of oligarchs who own Twitter. Right. I wish there weren't an oligarchy, but as it is, there are better and worse oligarchs, is what I'm saying.
Sam Dowler, there it is in a nutshell. Better the free speech absolutist in the form of Elon Musk than what we have to deal with otherwise.
Well, I mean, ultimately, Elon Musk is a live wire. Do you know? He does a lot of things for press, and he does them just because he wants to, and because he's the world's richest man. He's eccentric, and we all know that. Some of the things that he said he will do, like human authentication, I think is really important, and getting rid of bots if he possibly can. But when he's talking about freedom of speech, I kind of agree with what the guy from Black Lives Matter says. It does sort of, it opens the door to maybe getting people back on there, like Donald Trump, who was
Sam, just to be clear,
the
guy from Black Lives Matter was accusing Elon Musk of being a white supremacist and his father too, which, apart from being, I imagine, fairly defamatory, is not something we want to repeat too much, is it?
No, I don't agree with that part of it, but I'm saying that it is by opening the door to white supremacy, not necessarily from Elon Musk or his father. I'm just saying in general, like, it isn't allowed on Twitter at the moment. Like, Twitter is a toxic place anyway, so it needs more censorship and more safeguarding rather than less.
Yeah, nobody has to be on it, do they? I mean, it's a choice. You're not compelled to join Twitter, Sohrab Ahmari. I wonder whether you expect, in terms of what are the consequences of this might be. I mentioned people leaving, suspending their accounts. Maybe people won't want to work there. Maybe people won't want to advertise there. We've seen those kinds of boycotts before, not least on this news channel.
Look, I don't know. I trust his business judgments. Certainly have been better than mine, comparing our net worths. So I imagine he has a few tricks up his sleeves to deal with the advertising issue, to deal with staffing, et cetera, et cetera. But I really reject this quote unquote hate speech framework, and I'm not a free speech absolutist, by the way. The laws that govern in the United States these social media platforms are intended, for example, to keep out pornographic materials, and yet Twitter and Facebook are rife with porn, including pretty extreme stuff. Yet those laws are used by these platforms to shut down legitimate speech. For example, the Babylon Bee, which is a satirical site, gave an award to an assistant health secretary in the Biden administration who used to be a man and became a woman through transgender surgery, calling him Man of the Year. That was a satirical site. And the issue of transgender issues is one over which ordinary Americans and ordinary Britons disagree. And yet, under a certain kind of quote unquote hate speech framework, half of the debate on these issues is treated as unacceptable, worthy of censorship, et cetera, et cetera. Those are very dangerous. And again, I have to go back to the Hunter story because it was called Russian disinformation. Twitter called it hacked material. All of that turned out to be false. The Post at the time where I worked had uncovered kind of legitimate newsworthy material ahead of an election. And yet lots of Americans didn't get to see the story until afterward due to social media censorship, again, based on these dubious grounds. Yeah. So, again, not great to have oligarchs ruling our public sphere, but I'm going to take the oligarch who's not going to make moves like that are really detrimental to democratic deliberation.
Sam Dowler, you mentioned some of the things that's been suggested Musk might do. We didn't mention the idea of going public on the algorithm. What difference might that make?
Well, this is the thing. I mean, obviously, Elon Musk is a very powerful man, and I agree with your guest. Like, I mean, we can't deny his business decisions at the end of the day. So he is obviously going to be doing some crazy things with Twitter. He wants to monetize it. He wants to make it. I mean, you don't spend that amount of money on something. On a social media platform, which only really has 300 million followers. I mean, I know that sounds like a lot, but compared to other social media networks, it's not huge. And I agree with you, Colin. You don't have to be on it, etc. So, what is he going to do to make it different, to make it better? Because obviously he's assuming that he wants to make it better. I mean, at the moment, as I said before, it is a toxic place, specifically at the moment for the trans debate and politics in America, etc. And death threats, etc., etc., etc. And like, I mean, there is so much that can be done. It needs clearing up. It needs changing.
Yeah. Sohrab Ahmari, last 30 seconds. On that algorithm question, I mean, it's technical. I don't get it. Do you?
I certainly don't get it. But what I will tell you is a lot of right of center conservative types they've had enough experience with it to know that there is something in there that ensures that views that go against, let's say, the neoliberal consensus are downgraded in the list of replies. The rate at which you garner followers can be slowed down or sped up depending on whether you're politically favorable. We've seen enough of this anecdotally to suggest that it's true. So he needs to do something about that, and I'm glad that he said he wants to do something about that.
Sarah Bomari and Sam Dowler, thanks both for your time. Really appreciate it. Laura Dodsworth is alongside me, wants to put her two penneth in, as you'd expect, on this one. What do you think?
I think that Twitter's in hysterical meltdown. I think that part of that is a case of classic projection. So the kinds of people that you labelled progressives earlier, which, by the way, I hate that term.
No, do you know what? I normally write all my scripts, not that one. Not a word I would have used, actually. No, seriously.
I'm not sure they're actually progressive, but let's call them progressives. There's lots of people who are in meltdown. Are the kinds of people who believe that to protect democracy, you need to censor more and stifle free speech. I think they're concerned they're going to get some of the same medicine back. But the fact is that true proponents of free speech do not want to stifle free speech. Now, I think we're in an unfortunate position where we need one of the world's richest men even, to ride in on his white steed and rescue us. But that is where we are. Now, there is no democracy if the demos doesn't have its voice. Individuals need their voice. If we imagine Twitter as being a public square, we've got the bad king and the courtiers and their local officials deciding who stands where on the platform, who's gagged, who's in the stocks temporarily. Making the algorithms public would mean that we'd understand how Twitter has been either pushing stories up or suppressing stories down. And as your guest was saying, perhaps accelerating and decelerating follower growth. Now, Twitter say they don't shadow ban, but anecdotally, we don't think that's true. Project Veritas did a great expose 2 years ago.
You and I know what shadow ban is, but there's a danger with these Twitter stories. We disappear up our own fundament a little bit. What does shadow ban mean for people who don't know?
A shadow ban would mean that you see your account, you see your posts, but other people might not see your posts as much. So on Twitter, you can choose on your timeline to see posts chronologically. I'm always resetting my default because it changes on its own, or in a way that Twitter decides. So there are lots of algorithms at play, and they work differently on different platforms. The other thing is that hidden, alongside algorithms, there's another thing that affects transparency on the platform, and that is the hotlines that government have into big tech. So we know from Nadine Dorries talking in the House of Commons that the, as she called it, disinformation units, that's the Rapid Response Unit and the Counter-Disinformation Cell, call the big tech companies to get content taken down or suppressed if it's deemed misinformation. Now that takes us on to misinformation. Twitter can come in, Elon Musk can come in and make Twitter a freer place, but here in the UK, we're progressing the online safety bill, which requires big tech companies to protect not just children, but also adults in this country from harm and misinformation.
Does that mean, just to extrapolate on from what you're saying, does that mean at some point in the future Her Majesty's government sue Elon Musk, yes or no?
Yes, it could happen.
OK, that'll do. Laura, thanks very much. We're going to move on and we're going to talk about the news bulletin next. I think that's coming up, isn't it? But the weather actually is first. Here we go.
Hello again, I'm Aidan McKiven from the Met Office. Quite a bit of cloud out there at the moment, and much of that will thin and break overnight, allowing clear spells and, in places, a touch of frost by the morning. The reason being high pressure to the north of the UK, and around that high pressure, with the winds going in a clockwise fashion, we're pulling colder air in from the northeast. That's certainly having a notable impact on the east coast this afternoon, with temperatures at 9 to 12 Celsius and a bit of a chilly breeze. A lot of cloud across Scotland, northern and eastern England to begin things, but that tends to disappear overnight, and with lengthy clear spells, still some cloud floating around, but virtually everyone dry, and with those clear spells, well, temperatures will fall away. Mid to high single figures in most places, but in some sheltered spots just below freezing, particularly for parts of Scotland and northern England. So a touch of frost around first thing Wednesday morning, but plenty of sunshine to start things off. And actually, it's looking like a sunnier day for Scotland, for northern and eastern England. Still some cloud here and there, but on the whole, a dry day, a fine day, and with lighter winds, with that sunshine, although temperatures technically will be a degree or two lower than Tuesday, it will feel, I think, a bit more pleasant. Cloud again comes and goes on Wednesday night, but enough clear skies out there to allow a fairly widespread frost, certainly across northern England for parts of Scotland where we've got those clear skies. Further south, frost a bit more limited. It will be in sheltered spots where we've got the most prolonged clear spells where we'll see those temperatures dip close to, if not a touch below freezing. So another chilly start to Thursday, but quite quickly it does warm up. And actually we'll have lost that cool easterly breeze in the east coast, so it will warm up here especially. And for the vast majority, Thursday's a dry and bright day. Friday, a bit more cloud around. Saturday, fine.
I'm Liam Halligan. Join me every weekday at 1 p.m. for On the Money, your daily dose of economics, business and consumer news. I've got 25 years experience covering economics and finance. We hold grown-up discussions with a host of experts who really know their stuff. We can't buy gas and store it. That was a mistake, wasn't it?
I think it was a mistake.
Even you, Liam, don't have a crystal ball.
Inflation's a real threat.
Every weekday at 1, you're On the Money.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle, and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday, for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
Quite a few health stories today. Make no apologies for that. There's another important one coming up. The Health Secretary will appoint a hormone replacement therapy czar amid a shortage of these drugs. Sajid Javid says he will use the lessons learned during the COVID vaccine rollout to make sure supplies of HRT drugs are there to meet the high demand. Prescriptions for HRT have more than doubled in the last 5 years, and stocks running low, partly as a consequence. Joining me now, Carolyn Harris, the MP for Swansea East and co-chairwoman of the UK Menopause Task Force. Carolyn Harris, welcome to you and thanks for your time. What's going on here? Why has there been, for one thing, there's a lot more prescriptions being written, aren't there? But why is that the only reason for the shortages?
Yeah, it is. It's because, and it's not the government haven't done it. It's the women themselves. The women themselves have campaigned to be heard. They've been demanding HRT. Doctors are now giving them prescriptions for HRT. And as a result of that, we've seen the demand have increased. What the government should have been doing is working with the manufacturers to make sure that the product was there to meet the demand. And they haven't done that. So the situation we find now is that women are literally travelling up and down the motorways to try to swap products with other women to make sure that they continue on a HRT regime.
Is this, Carolyn, one of those stories where there's a particular pinch point in a supply chain, there's a missing ingredient, there's a shortage somewhere, or not?
No, I mean, as far as I can see, this is bad planning. Bad planning by the manufacturer and bad planning by the government. I mean, we know that there are more women monthly getting HRT prescriptions now than we're getting it annually a few years ago. And that's entirely down to the fact that we've raised awareness with women. Women are taking control of their health and they're saying to GPs, I want a bit of normality back in my life, and to do that I need HRT. So the grassroots campaigners who've been doing fantastic work over the years. Over the last couple of years, we've seen more celebrities getting involved. We've raised awareness, and now we have a situation where the government had not planned and the manufacturers didn't plan, didn't foresee it. How on earth they couldn't foresee it, but they've not done what they should have done and looked out for women.
Carolyn Harris, Laura Dodsworth's alongside me today. She's got some thoughts, maybe a question on this. Have you?
Yes, Carolyn, thank you. You've been, you've been a really strong champion and advocate for HRT, and of course it's down to you that HRT is supposedly going to become free for women, and just at a time where you can't get hold of it for love nor money.
Yeah. Well,
when's the plan for when it becomes free?
Well, it's not going to become free, unfortunately, because I campaigned for it to be free, which it is in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland, but this government wouldn't give it free to women. They said they would make it an annual cost, so women would pay once a year, regardless of the number of times they refilled that prescription. Without any communication about this, they dropped the ball that this isn't going to happen till April next year. So that on top of the shortage, I am one angry woman at the moment, but there are 13 million angry women behind me, all demanding the rights for women who are menopausal.
Absolutely. And I think one problem is it's seen as a bit of a lifestyle drug, isn't it? And it's not until women hit the menopause when they realise it's a lot more than a lifestyle drug. I mean, for instance, suicide is most common in the age bracket of women aged 45 to 54, and I'm sure that can't be unrelated to menopause. No. Some women really do need it to get by day to day. When do you see the supply problem easing?
Well, you better hurry up and ease, because there are other products that are out there which can be prescribed, but because of the formulary process is taking too long, then this product is sitting on shelves in warehouses and it's not getting to the women who need it. The company who make the product that's gone into short supply, they are saying that they will replenish stocks by June. You know yourself, you can't wait. You can't say to women, oh, well, you're not going to have your HRT till June because we can't produce it. It's not good enough. Suicide is 16% higher amongst women in the menopausal years. This is literally women, to say that they are hanging by a thread is no word of a lie. And to take the product away from women who have started to feel normal again is nothing short of cruel. And we've got to get this remedied, and immediately.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. And if there's one group of people that the government shouldn't want to go up against, and it's angry menopausal women.
And on that note, we have to leave things there. Carolyn Harris, MP, thanks very much indeed with Laura Dodsworth.
Thanks, Colin.
Some very valid points. Thanks very much indeed. It's just gone 5 o'clock. Hi there, welcome to Brazier. Coming up live at 5. Our GBNews Northern Ireland reporter is on the scene in Larne, at the port where a P&O ferry that was adrift in the Irish Sea for over an hour has just docked. The RMT union says it's all to do with job cuts there, getting in the way of safety. We'll bring you the very latest. Was a disaster narrowly averted? Imagine if that had happened. No power in the depths of a winter storm. Also, why are thousands of us facing the prospect of having to cancel summer holidays because of a huge backlog in the processing of passports? Does it have anything to do with civil servants working from home? What difference does it make to crime in your area when the local police station closes? We learned today that one police station has been closing every fortnight in recent years. Also, has lockdown reduced the natural immunity of under fives to dangerous levels? High rates of children's hepatitis suggests it might have been. Alongside reflecting on that story and all the rest throughout today's show, the writer Laura Dodsworth. But first, the latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. The top story today, as Colin was saying, a P&O ferry that lost power and was adrift off the coast of Northern Ireland has now docked at Larne Harbour. A P&O spokesperson said there were no reported injuries on board the vessel after it was affected by a mechanical issue. The European Causeway, as it's called, had been detained in Larne earlier in March after 31 safety failings were uncovered. It was cleared 2 weeks later. P&O said in a full statement that an investigation will now be undertaken. And in other news today, police have officially identified the 4 family members who were stabbed to death in south-east London on Monday. Dolet Hill, her partner Denton Burke, her daughter Tanisha Oforia-Kufo and her granddaughter Samantha Drummonds were killed at Miss Hill's home in Bermondsey on Monday. A 28-year-old man from Lewisham is suspected of carrying out the fatal attack. Is in hospital himself, we believe in a stable condition. In international news, Russia says if London encourages Ukraine to strike targets on Russian territory, it's going to lead to a proportionate response. That's according to Russian state media. UK Defence Minister James Heappey said earlier it would be acceptable for Ukrainian forces to use Western weapons to attack military targets on Russian soil. Russia has also accused NATO of waging a proxy war with Moscow by arming Ukraine. But Mr. Heappey says individual countries are supplying military aid, not NATO.
NATO is reinforcing the alliance's eastern flank as a defensive measure to reassure our Eastern European allies. NATO is not the donor community. Many of the people in the donor community are NATO countries, but similarly, Australians, the Kiwis and others are part of it as well.
Meanwhile, the US has welcomed Germany's decision to send heavy weapons to Ukraine for the first time. Speaking from an airbase in Germany, the US Defence Secretary said NATO leaders will now meet monthly to intensify support for Ukraine.
I applaud all the countries that have risen and are rising to meet this demand. But we don't have any time to waste. The briefings today laid out clearly why the coming weeks will be so crucial for Ukraine. So we've got to move at the speed of war.
Well, here at home, police searches are ongoing in rural Lancashire for a missing woman believed to have been kidnapped. 33-year-old Katie Kenyon from Burnley hasn't been seen since last Friday morning. Lancashire police have been given more time to question a 50-year-old man who's arrested on suspicion of kidnap. The police have issued a photograph of a white transit van which Miss Kenyon is believed to have travelled in with a man and have urged anyone with any information to come forward. The social media site Twitter's founder, Jack Dorsey, is welcoming a £34 billion takeover of the company by the world's richest man. He says Elon Musk's bid is the only solution he trusts. The Tesla chief executive is buying the company for £42.20 a share. Originally, Twitter rejected the offer, but the board reconsidered when Mr. Musk demonstrated he'd secured the finances for the deal. Political economist Dr. Stephen McCabe has questioned whether buying Twitter was a good business move for Mr. Musk.
Buying a company that, apart from 2 years, 2019 and 18, the year before, has never made a profit. In fact, in 2020, for the where the latest accounts are available, made a $1.1 billion loss. So to buy sort of a company such as this and spending it, what's a large amount, $44 billion, is somewhat strange. What's in it for him?
The Prime Minister will chair a committee to tackle the cost of living crisis in the coming weeks. Downing Street says a number of ideas were discussed during a cabinet meeting this morning, which will feed into a more formal process. Boris Johnson, who's hinted that parents could receive more childcare support, wants ministers to come up with ways to ease financial pressures on households without relying on new government spending. And lastly, hundreds of people have lined the streets of a town in Cornwall for the funeral of D-Day veteran Harry Billinge. Mr. Billinge was 18 years old when he landed on Gold Beach during the Normandy invasion in 1944. He was made an MBE 2 years ago after raising more than £50,000 to build a memorial honouring his fallen comrades. The 96-year-old died early this month and was described as having a winning smile. You're with GB News. More news as it happens. Now back to Brazier.
It is coming up to 7 minutes past 5. Let's bring you more on that P&O ferry. P&O Ferries says a full investigation will be carried out after one of its ships travelling between Cairnryan in Dumfriesshire and Larne in Northern Ireland lost power off the coast of County Antrim a little earlier on this afternoon. It's the European Causeway, the vessel in question. It can carry up to 410 passengers. We've no idea how many were actually on board, if any. It was adrift. She was adrift 5 miles off the coast for more than an hour, according to the tracking website Marine Traffic. The vessel's now docked, but it's worth remembering the context to this. Scandal-riven ferry operator, P&O. You'll know what it's done to its staff. We reported on it widely. Their plans to sack existing staff and replace them with cheaper foreign alternatives. Let's go live to Larne and speak to GBNews Northern Ireland reporter Dougie Beattie, who's there. Dougie, welcome to you. I'm seeing reports of all kinds of disquiet amongst the serving crew members there, some suggesting they wouldn't or were very unhappy going to sea in this ship. There were replacement crew in the engine room in whom they had very little trust. Lots of speculation, but at least we can say one thing with conviction. She's back safe in Larne now.
She is indeed. She came back in here a while or two ago. Engines running. It seems to be a problem with the command of the ship. It seems to be a steering problem, if you like. She was adrift 5 miles off the coast. And now Larne Harbour is P&O's main base in Northern Ireland. Northern Ireland provides about 20% of agricultural food to the UK, and we receive a lot coming the other way. So these ports are vital to us. And any other day, this wouldn't have been a headline story. But of course, as you've pointed out, this was one of 2 ships that failed tests and were held for longer than others because of that staff replacement. Now, during that period of time, I was up here filming. The engines were running, staff were training on these boats. But as you can imagine, these are huge vessels. Now, holidaymakers that were annoyed at the time, shall we say, of losing their place on those boats had to go to another ferry company who very graciously laid on another vessel. This could not be doing any good at all for the reputation of P&O, never mind in Northern Ireland, but right across the UK.
Some of those failures apparently were because the lifeboats they couldn't release the lifeboats if it came to using them in the way that they would need to be deployed. And we've got this problem today, maybe with the steering, maybe with engine, it's not clear at this stage. I do wonder if this was happening in Dover, whether this story would be getting a lot more attention. But let me speculate on this point. Weather looks fantastic behind you, clear blue skies. Presume the sea is not particularly stormy. Had this happened in January, in the midst of a storm, a vessel like this carrying hundreds of passengers would have been in serious jeopardy.
It would, and it was only 5 miles off the coast. And this coast here can be very, very ferocious, very violent seas in it. It runs straight down, the Irish Sea runs, of course, straight down between the British mainland and Ireland, and it acts like a funnel sometimes. I mean, January, February had quite bad storms here, as you pointed out. And if they couldn't release lifeboats, if this had lost its steering, it may have been wrecked on the coast somewhere. But I think that the main worry here is that financially there's an awful lot of problems here with hauliers bringing goods in and out of the UK. And if P&O were replacing staff in order to cut corners or save costs, more to the point, I think this may do no good to them. In fact, it'll probably cost them money at the end of the day.
I'm sure that's true. Dougie Beattie, really appreciate you getting there so quickly on this story. Thanks ever so much. Just a line from the RNT union. They've tweeted these words. P&O ferries and their paymasters in Dubai are no longer capable of running a safe service and should be stripped of the licence to operate their ships. Ukraine may be slipping down the news bulletins, but there is a strong argument that the conflict is reaching its most dangerous phase. If anybody, for instance, had imagined a situation a few months ago where Russia's foreign minister would warn us, as he just has, in the West, that there was a, quote, very serious risk of nuclear war, then we would have been deeply, deeply alarmed. But that's what Sergei Lavrov has done. He also said NATO was now effectively at war with Russia. Just so many words, or are we on the brink of something more terrible than any of us can potentially imagine? Joining me now, Rear Admiral Chris Parry, for his thoughts on this one. Chris Parry, thanks for your time. These were strong words from Lavrov. To what do you attribute them? Is he just sabre-rattling, or is this for real?
No, I think it's a sign of Russian desperation. It's huffing and puffing. They know they're in trouble in Ukraine. Their objectives have been markedly reduced from what they started with. Frankly, I think they're thrashing around looking for a way in which they can say they've been successful.
Saying NATO's upping the ante, supplying more and more sophisticated weaponry that's killing their service personnel. Ben Wallace, our Defence Secretary, said yesterday in the Commons that 15,000 Russian service personnel have now perished on the battlefields of Ukraine, and some of them will have been killed by our weapons, by NATO weapons.
Well, they've been killed by the weapons of countries that have chosen to send them. They haven't been sent with NATO labels on them, of course. The fact of life is that Russia has chosen, through its regime, to assault a free country, and free democratic countries have said, look, this isn't right. We don't want this to be the shape of the future where might is seen as right. And quite rightly, they've also condemned a permanent member of the Security Council of the United Nations, who should be a responsible member of the world order, for doing what it's done in Ukraine. We've seen crimes against humanity. We've seen aggressive war conducted against Ukraine. And goodness knows what else we're going to see before the 9th of May, when I think Russia will call a halt and claim victory.
Do you think, is it inconceivable that Russia will use tactical battlefield nuclear weapons to clear an area?
Yeah, I think it's pretty inconceivable that Russia, even in its current state of mind, will use nuclear weapons in a regional conflict. Nuclear weapons really are about existential issues, either the survival of a regime or indeed a country's way of life. The calculation the Russians will have to make is to whether there will be a proportionate or a disproportionate response to the unleashing of nuclear weapons for the first time since 1945. Nuclear weapons are a genie you can't control, and the Russians won't be sure about what the response would be. Let's face it, if they unleash a nuclear weapon in Ukraine with the prevailing winds and weather, the fallout's going to come into Russia as well. We've seen a number of false flag incidents created by Russia, which has resulted in death and injury to Russians and other people. But I think probably going for nuclear fallout is probably going a bit too far.
Chris Parry, as ever, appreciate your time. Thanks very much. One police station in England has been closing every fortnight for the last 7 years on average. The worst offenders are in the south, where population growth has been greatest. Thames Valley Police, which covers Berkshire, Buckinghamshire and Oxfordshire, closed 23 stations and 44 counters. Let's talk to former Surrey Police and Crime Commissioner and a former senior detective too, Kevin Hurley. Kevin Hurley, welcome to you. Just to clear up a point, a definition. What do we mean by, we all get police stations, what do we mean by police counters?
Well, these will be literally a kind of front desk, a reception desk that they may have put in a shop, an old shop on the high street or something like that. And it would be something like that, where you just walk in. They've closed those because they can't resource manning them, actually.
Can we explain to people why this is happening? Is it just about saving money?
Bottom line, it's a money issue. I mean, when I was the Police and Crime Commissioner in Surrey, I inherited a situation where we went from having 28 police stations to only having 3. And remember, Surrey is the richest, wealthiest county in the country with the best resource police force, yet it could only keep 3 police stations open. The choice was simple.
Kevin, where were the police officers going?
Well, they basically went to 3 large police stations, and then in partnership with 11 of the borough councils, we were able to rent floor space in 11 town halls is basically what happened. And it was a judgment made before me by the former Chief Constable and Police Authority before Police and Crime Commissioners. It was either chop 20% of the police workforce or chop police stations. Now, the real tragedy about that decision that was forced, because no one wants to lose police officers, because in the end, they're the ones who deliver the work, is what police stations provide is local police officers who know their local people, they know their local jobs, they know their local criminals, and they build relationships with people in the community. And all of that has gone. So what you've got across the country now is the 999 response police are often based maybe half an hour's drive away from where they will actually work. So they're far worse in terms of deployment than the fire brigade would ever be allowed to be. So they've got absolutely no possibility of knowing the people where they are. So let me give you an example. Police officers who work down in, say, southwest Croydon actually have also got responsibility to working out as far as Pets Wood, the other side of Alpington, on response calls. You're talking a huge area of London. They don't even know the way. It's all got to be done by sat-nav. So the idea of them turning up and having a quiet word with a bunch of yobs hanging about at the bus stop or problem kids, they know is not going to happen.
It doesn't work, does it? Kevin, there's another angle to this, and that is the element of public reassurance that we pay for our police service, don't we? That we derive from the knowledge that in our midst, in our neighbourhood, in our community is that police station. I just wanted to bring in Laura Dodsworth on this, because we were talking during the earlier about how this story affects people. And Laura, it's worth just sharing the story with Kevin. We'll see what he makes of it. But you were telling me earlier about getting involved in a road rage incident. What happened next?
Absolutely. I was being followed by somebody who I can only assume was under the influence of road rage or something. I was driving like an angel, and he was following me, and he was making hand signals and being very threatening. And I thought, I'll drive to the police station. And I get there and I realise I'm one of those Surrey towns where the police station's been shut. So I went to the town hall where I had a feeling there was a police counter. Of course, it's out of hours. So there was nowhere for me to go. I had to just drive around the area till he'd given up. Now, I see the point you were leading into about how people want to feel safe because we're paying for it. I don't think we should pander to a feeling of being safe. We actually need to be safe. And I think that community policing is a very important part of actually being safe.
Let's just go back to Kevin Hurley for his thoughts on that one. I mean, that's an extreme example, Kevin Hurley, isn't it, of somebody, actually trying to get to a police station for sanctuary or as a safe haven, and actually finding when they get there it's no longer there.
Yeah, I mean, it's absolutely appalling. I actually live in Esher, the richest town in the richest borough in the richest county. And my nearest police station, where response officers operate 24/7, is either at Staines or at Guildford, which is at least half an hour's drive away, or if they come on their blue lights and so on, will be 20 minutes. But this is if it's like that, as I say, in the richest part of the country, where, bear in mind, half the cabinet are our local MPs, the famous names Gove, Rabb, Grayling, all of these people are our MPs. What is it like where, may I say, people who don't quite have the political clout live? And your other guest is absolutely right. It's appalling. My own son had a similar case where some vandals smashed up his car. He ran to the police station. It was closed and had been for some time. When eventually got through to the police, was fobbed off. Now, I'm not actually going to be critical of the police operators themselves or the police constables themselves. They're simply overwhelmed in terms of how things are organised and the resourcing, because basically what you had was nearly a 20% cut in the police budget at a time where the social demographics of the country were changing. So we were getting a lot of complex crimes we hadn't had to deal with in quite the same way: organised criminality, people trafficking, slavery, and so on, as well as a very litigious society where if police put a foot wrong, everyone complains. So a lot of police time now has to be taken up in crossing the T's and dotting the I's. And there's been no increase. In fact, there's been a decrease in the number of police officers and a huge decrease in the number of civilian support staff who used to do a lot of the admin work. I mean, bottom line, I often come on your programme and say that you get what you pay for. And if we're going to get these cuts, combined with what I should add at the moment, is the ludicrous concept introduced under Theresa May called police reform 11 years ago, where what happened is 4 clever boys from university decided they knew better and would reorganise the entire police service instead of listen to people like me who've been doing it for 30 years, pretty well educated actually, been around the world and done it in Iraq and Afghanistan. So we had a bit of a clue, but they imposed their will on us. And now we're in a situation where 10 years after police reform, the arrest rate by the police, as was covered by your programme yesterday, has dropped by 50%. We've also now broken the record in London for teenage murders from 2008. And that, bear in mind, is with an NHS which is far better now at saving lives as a result of the trauma treatments developed in Afghanistan with our soldiers.
Yeah.
So,
Kevin Hurley,
police reform ought to be reversed immediately.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people would agree with that, reopening temporarily closed down police stations. Kevin Hurley, as always, thanks very much indeed for your thoughts. Really appreciate it. We were showing some pictures there of New Scotland Yard. That will be the last police station to be closed down, one imagines. Coming up, has lockdown reduced the natural immunity of under 5s to dangerous levels? High rates of children's hepatitis suggest it might have. First, we'll bring you the break.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events, and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's 2 questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you, or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
In the space of 3 months, Britain has seen as many cases of children's hepatitis as would normally be seen in a year. In total, 114 children, usually under the age of 5, have developed acute hepatitis of unknown origin, to give it the description used by doctors. 10 youngsters were sufficiently unwell to require liver transplants. 1 has died. Why the rise in numbers? Well, it may be a function of lockdown. Kids were not mixing, nor were they sharing infections and strengthening their natural immunity. It may alternatively have been that the offending pathogen has mutated to pose a greater threat. Joining me now, Professor of Primary Care and Public Health at Imperial College, Azim Majid. Azim, thanks so much for your time. Are we right to see this as a byproduct of lockdown? May it be something else?
Hello, Colin. I think, as you said, it's one possible theory. So during lockdown, we had quite low rates of many viral infections, which meant children's immunity wasn't at the level we might expect during normal times when they're exposed to viruses regularly. and that may have led to some weakening of immunity in children and therefore more serious infection now. But it's one of many theories. Other theories include the fact the virus may be mutated, the adenovirus, which has been linked to many of these cases, may mutate into a more serious form. It may be due to a poison or a drug, for example, kids have been exposed to. It may be two viruses interacting. So a number of different theories which may account for this concerning rise in hepatitis in young children. So as yet, we're not entirely clear of the cause, but we need to be aware of the various causes and work towards finding out the actual cause so we can take action to address this serious problem.
And is there a particular reason why we're talking about such young children being affected in this way? And in a way that, I mean, I mentioned the fatality, but I mean, for getting on for a dozen kids to have liver transplants, a major surgical intervention.
That is unusual. So normally with hepatitis, it's the older people who tend to be more severely affected. So when you get a virus causing hepatitis, generally it's fairly mild in children, and it's the older people, adults, who risk a more serious illness. So this is unusual to have so many kids affected seriously. And again, we need to really research this and really understand the causes and find out why it's going on, and also look elsewhere in the world and see if this is something going on in the UK, or is this more of a global phenomena.
I mean, lay people like me would sort of think if you keep kids at that age when they are, maximally spreading germs around, and if you stop that process, that very natural, process has been happening for 500,000 years from happening for a year or two with interruptions, there are going to be knock-on effects from that. I mean, that feels like a reasonable assumption.
Yeah, it is, one theory, and clearly any lockdown comes with health, social and economic costs, so it's not a cost-free option. So in the past, we've not had this kind of lockdown previously, so this is quite a new thing we've had in the UK and globally. So the full effects, aren't fully understood of this lockdown, of lockdowns and how they impact children's immunity. So it may take some time, perhaps even years, to fully understand how this pandemic's affected children's long-term immunity from other viruses other than from COVID-19.
Azim Majid, as ever, I really appreciate your time. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much, Colin.
Laura Dodsworth is alongside me, has written a lot about lockdown, COVID, and you feel further work, yes, it may be necessary, but you see a strong arrow pointing at lockdown on this one.
Well, I think this is one for medical people to investigate, but there's a familiar echo here. It's just about a year ago that Public Health England modelled that there would be an uptick in RSV, which is a serious respiratory illness for children, as a result of lockdown. Indeed, there was an uptick. RSV is more serious, I gather, for small children than COVID is. So it does feel like this is another case of lockdown has unintended consequences, which we in all of our hubris can't necessarily predict when we inflict this huge non-pharmaceutical intervention. It will be interesting to see what's happened around the world, but this was the story a year ago about RSV. It feels like we're in a similar place again.
Yeah, I mean, as you say, the world's become a laboratory for this, doesn't it? So we'll get an answer. We'll get an answer from somewhere. If not the UK, then we'll get an answer from somewhere.
There's one huge thing which has changed in the world, and that is lockdowns. Other than that, like you said, as a layperson, common sense would teach that people should mix and exchange normal pathogens and germs and develop immunity the normal way. And that's not happened for small children who weren't at nursery.
Yeah, Laura, for now, thanks very much indeed. Coming up, we're going to be telling you a little bit more about that situation in the Irish Sea today. A vessel, one of the ferries that plies between Dumfriesshire, southern Scotland, southwest Scotland, and Larne in Northern Ireland. It's come adrift, literally. There's been a failure with the propulsion system. It's safely back in port now in Larne, but the RMT union are saying this flags up a major problem with the way that company's been run. Some reports suggesting parts of the crew were unhappy with some of the foreign nationals that have been brought in to staff the engine room. I'm sure the truth will in time come out. In the meantime, the union are saying this could have ended very badly had the weather been less good. It's calm today on the Irish Sea. Wouldn't have been quite so calm in January. So we'll be reflecting on that, but also reflecting on this story. Peter Hitchens joining me to explain why he thinks Tony Blair's latest claim that 70% of teens ought to go to university is crackers. First, we'll bring you up to date with the latest news headlines with Polly.
Colin, thank you. Well, as you've been hearing, a P&O ferry that lost power and then was adrift off the coast of Northern Ireland has now docked at the port of Larne. A company spokesperson said there were no reported injuries after the ship had been affected by a mechanical issue. The European Causeway, as it's called, had been detained in Larne earlier in March after 31 safety failings were uncovered. It was cleared 2 weeks later. Russia says if London encourages Ukraine to strike targets on Russian territory, it will immediately lead to a proportionate response. That's according to Russian state media. And it comes after the UK Defence Minister James Heappey said it would be acceptable for Ukrainian forces to use Western weapons to attack military targets on Russian soil. Downing Street has stressed the need for Twitter to remain responsible and protect its users from harm. That's as the platform's founder welcomes a £44 billion takeover of the company by the world's richest man, Elon Musk. The Tesla boss says he wants Twitter to be a platform for free speech. Police searches are ongoing in rural Lancashire for a missing woman believed to have been kidnapped. 33-year-old Katie Kenyon from Burnley hasn't been seen since last Friday morning. Lancashire police have been given more time to question a 50-year-old man arrested on suspicion of kidnapped. And Downing Street say there are no plans to make the extra bank holiday for the Queen's Platinum Jubilee permanent. The Confederation of British Industry and the Archbishop of Canterbury are calling for the day off on the 3rd of June to become an annual event. But Number 10 says a bank holiday could cost the economy £2 billion. On TV, online and on your radio via DAB+, you're with GB News. Colin Brazier will be back in just a moment.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr. Me and my panel will get stuck right into the day's events and I can tell you, in fact, I can warn you, expect some robust debates, some strong opinions and perspectives from both sides of the fence. It's about you at home as well. I love to read out all of your comments, or at least as many as I can. So join me, Michelle Dewberry, Monday to Friday, 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
On radio, they call it the drive time slot, 4 p.m. until 6 p.m. as listeners head home. It's that part of the schedule when the dust of the day's events begin to clarify, and we try to make sense of it for you. Brazier is drive time for radio and TV. It's fast, it's punchy, it's opinionated, there's a Brazier angle and a little bit of levity.
That's the question. That's two questions, actually.
That's Brazier, Monday to Thursday, 4 till 6 on GB News.
Hello, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
Make sure that you join us Monday to Thursday, 10 a.m. until midday, right here on GB News for To The Point.
We're not afraid to talk about the topics that matter to you or the big topics that always matter.
We cover absolutely everything, from the breaking political stories of the day to law and order, what's going on in the channel. We're not afraid to hold people to account.
We always make sure we include your views on our show.
Indeed, if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we're saying it. So make sure you join the conversation with us, 10 a.m. until midday, Monday to Thursday for To The Point on GB News.
I'm Dan Wootton. Join me Monday to Thursday from 9 to 11 for the feistiest and most fun news debate on TV, where free speech reigns. I'll bring you a sharp take on the day's biggest stories, bombshell newsmaker interviews, and A-list guests. And I guarantee you, no spin, no bias, no censorship, and no reason to go to bed. That's Dan Wootton tonight, Monday to Thursdays from 9 on GB News.
7 in 10 young people should attend university in order to help boost the economy, so recently said the former Labour Prime Minister Tony Blair. Peter Hitchens, who I'll speak to next, says the proposal is, quote, sheer foaming madness and actively wicked. Should Tony Blair stay out of public life, or could he perhaps even be eyeing up a return to it? More importantly, perhaps, is the policy he pioneered of sending half of all young Britons to college a terrible mistake. The Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens is with me now. Peter Hitchens, welcome to you. Just explain what you were saying in your column for our viewers and listeners.
Well, I think that there has been a ridiculous pretense that a university degree by itself will be a great advantage to the person who holds it. And even before the huge expansion of universities, which began slowly in the 1960s and then took off under John Major and went into the stratosphere under the Blair regime, even then there were quite a few people who came out of university with degrees who didn't get much out of it at all. An arts degree won't necessarily guarantee you a particularly high income or get you into a job which is particularly desirable. Some kinds of degrees, more technical or more scientific, will do so, but the majority, I think, of the degrees which have come out of the university expansion of the 1990s are not of that kind. And the new universities which have grown up since then don't seem to me to be remotely approaching the standard which universities used to attain. And so what you're doing is you're saying to people, get yourself very heavily into debt, pay enormous fees to an institution about which you know very little to get a certificate which won't be much help to you, when in fact it seems to me that if we were seriously worried about our society, we should be encouraging people where possible to be qualified in skills which are measurable and real, and which would enable them to have useful, productive, and indeed well-paid lives. And it's just a mistake. There's the whole business of university expansion. It has been explained to me can be very temporarily economically beneficial. Say to a city which has not had a university before gets one, it now has this big business in its midst, which gets a lot of income from fees and possibly from rental. But this is all a sort of Ponzi scheme because all the money comes from borrowed money or taxation. It's not real. It's not a real industry. And I just think that we're careering down a path which is neither good for the country nor good for the people. And it introduces, from the very first step in life, young people to the idea of being in debt, something which I was brought up to have a complete horror of.
We'll come back. I know my guest in the studio, Laura Dodsworth, is very keen to address that question in just a second, and we'll let her do that. But just, I mean, on several points there, Tony Blair has talked about the economic impact and good that a university can do. And he's even suggested, I think, that it should trickle down not just to big cities, but, big towns having their own universities. I just wonder to what extent you feel, and this is a more important question, certainly for me, that there's a dampening effect of going to university, providing a barrier to sort of cognitive diversity. And I know you've written before about New Labour and Blair in particular being actually far more actively Marxist, and there'll be some people pulling their hair out of that, more actively Marxist in trying to shape the way society thinks and behaves.
Well, yes, it's true, but that is a different subject. I mean, there's no question that my university generation, which you could trace back to the late 60s and into the early 70s, were very heavily committed to quite far left positions. And although people have, of course, grown up to some extent and no longer take the crudely Marxist revolutionary attitudes they had before, they're still, to a great extent, sceptical about the conservative institutions of society, whether it be marriage or the law or anything else, and have in the intervening 50 years, have gone into the great institutions of our society and changed them, including, of course, political parties. And I did a survey once of just how many of Blair's own cabinet were known to have been on the organised Marxist left in their university years, including Blair. And this extraordinary number, and those are the ones that we know. So that there's certainly been an element of this, but it's not the same question, really. Woodrow Wilson, who in many ways one of the most disastrous presidents the United States ever had, was also, of course, I think, president of Princeton University. And he said when he was there that part of his aim as head of a university was to make a man think differently from his father. And I think there's very little doubt that people, when they go off to university for 3 or 4 years, do very often become socialized by peer pressure into holding wholly different opinions on everything from politics to morals from the ones they would have held had they stayed at home and continued to live in the society in which they grew up. So there is an element of that in it too, I think, which the left find appealing because they know perfectly well the influence of family and hometown is often conservative. But it's not the point I was making, which was almost a purely economic one. I basically said, did you ever see in the old yellow pages, do you ever find on the internet any number for an emergency, a way to call an arts graduate in an emergency? And you don't, because nobody does. But what you do find is people wanting plumbers and electricians and people who can do useful things. We'd be much better off training people to do that. And the people who go to university in these often very vague courses where they quite seldom see their tutors, would in many cases be better off getting a proper vocational training and something people would want to call them up and ask them to do.
Well, Laura Dodsworth and Peter Hitchens, do stay with us. Laura Dodsworth's got a point about actually the economic impact on the individual. Laura?
Yes. Well, I mean, first of all, if Tony Blair has an idea, I think a lot of us have a sneaking suspicion that it's just intrinsically bad, and Peter's deconstructed exactly why. I'm quite worried about all the debt as well that students are racking up, which is something that Peter was going into. I know these are strong words, but I just have a feeling that university is almost like a form of indentured servitude now. The problem is that if 70% of pupils have a degree, then the value of the degree is itself degraded. It just becomes a signal that you've got a basic level of education, social skills, reasonably hardworking, and then a master's becomes a degree. And then you're actually going into even more debt. I mean, recently, because the interest rates are tied in with the RPI, at the moment, if you earn more than £49,130, the interest rate's gone from 4.5% to 12%. That's more than mortgages, that's more than many forms of unsecured credit. Think about 70% of the population being saddled with tens of thousands, or sometimes it could be hundreds of thousands of pounds worth of debt for no real purpose. Like Peter says, you know, there's this yellow pages effect. Yeah. There's a real lack of joined up thinking. Higher up in the show, you were talking about skill shortages and immigration. Research from BDO shows actually 26% of companies say their biggest challenge in the next 6 months is finding people with the right skills. Educating 70% of the population to degree level just degrades degrees, and there's no jobs for all these arts graduates, like Peter said.
Peter Hitchens, it's a strong phrase, indentured servitude. Laura Dodsworth uses it. Is it fair?
Well, it amuses me. I was, in fact, an indentured apprentice for nearly 3 years on the Swindon Evening Advertiser. That was the arrangement then. I've got nothing against indentures. No, I wouldn't use that term. I think what it does do is it puts people in slavery to debt. And it's very hard to pay these debts off. And the interest rates, which were originally quite generous applied to them, are now going up faster and faster. And so it becomes, in effect, a graduate tax. But a graduate tax for a degree which won't necessarily do you any good. And it's true that, of course, you don't earn anything much at all and you aren't required to repay. And I think things are made quite light for you. But an awful lot of people will find themselves earning average salaries, and they will find huge chunks taken out of those as a consequence of getting into this debt, which they can't escape. And inescapable debt is a poisonous thing, and it takes the edge of people's lives. It makes it impossible for them to do all kinds of things they wish to do, and it doesn't go away. And I'm very, very unhappy about anything which encourages people to get into debt. It's not quite as bad as encouraging gambling, for instance, another thing that the governments of today seem quite keen on doing. But it is. This is why I said it was wicked. Because of the way it entices people into spending money they haven't got on something which actually probably won't do them much good. A lot of it is to do with the general devaluation of education in this country. I reckon that those people who attended state grammar schools in the 1950s and early 60s probably got a far better education out of those than most people get out of university now. And they learned actual things they were required to learn. If they learn languages, they will have learned vocabulary and grammar so that they could actually build on their knowledge and learn to speak those languages properly. They learned proper history and geography. They learned hard sciences. And these are things which are increasingly lacking. So much of what is taught to people these days is a mixture of vagueness and political and social indoctrination rather than education as we used to understand it. And it's all part of a revolution in society, which I don't think has been a revolution for the better.
Peter Hitchens, we have to leave it there. Mail on Sunday columnist Peter Hitchens. Have a look at his latest column. Thanks very much indeed. The American actors Amber Heard and Johnny Depp are partway through a defamation trial in the United States, which has, I think it's fair to say, gripped many millions online. Depp is suing his ex-wife, they were married between 2015 and 2016, for $50 million. He claims he was defamed in an article she wrote for the Washington Post, in which she described herself as a, quote, public figure representing domestic abuse. They have subsequently accused each other of acts of domestic violence, much else besides, too. One reason for all their interest online, as well as other more, lurid acts. On social media, one aspect of the defamation case that's been really striking has been the wellspring of support for Depp, What's prompted it? Is it really there? Joining me now, the host of the Politics People podcast, Paul Duddridge. Paul, welcome to you. It's the most extraordinary trial, but is it a reasonable assessment from our perspective that Depp is winning the sort of court of public opinion on this one?
100% right. That's exactly what's happening. I'm not a legal expert, but I don't really think this case is going to turn out with either Depp receiving his $50 million for defamation or Amber Heard countersuing for $100 million for being defamed as a liar by Trump. That's the by Depp. That's the allegation, Freudian slip. What is happening, and it is absolutely this groundswell on Twitter, where the public just seem to be organically siding with Depp. And what's really fascinating is if this case had actually happened 2 years ago, 3 years ago, this all springs from a 2018 article in the Washington Post, as you say, I think Depp would probably be in handcuffs by now. The world has evolved so quickly that Depp was treated by many in the industry as foolish for even bringing this case just a couple of years ago, for the very idea that he'd fight back and try and salvage his reputation. The way it's playing out is it looks like even if he loses the case financially, he has definitely won in the court of public opinion.
And in terms of what's behind the public attention, I mean, there's nothing new in prurience. People like to see what's happening behind the curtains, don't they? And particularly if the two protagonists who are at each other's throats are bearing their souls in such a lurid fashion.
Well, yes, absolutely. We talked about this just recently, the way that fame is atomizing now. This is just as valid a performance and just as valid a career move, if you like, in the new age that we live, as a release of a movie. You know, Depp's had global TV on the stand for 4 days now with his testimony. That's got to be one of the biggest openings he's had since Pirates of the Caribbean. So it is prurience. We are prurient. I certainly speak for myself, I am. But this is just a valid way to promote oneself these days, and they have massive names, and this is actually a completely valid way of advertising your wares and your personality. If as a byproduct of that you can actually sway public opinion and perhaps salvage your dramatic artistic career, that's a bonus. But this has been so interesting that this has, as I think I've touched on, hasn't gone the way that commentators expected it to. This was expected to be a slam dunk. A man is being accused of something in the press and everybody must just sympathize with the woman. And it hasn't gone that way, and it hasn't gone that way in an orchestrated way. This has just happened organically and, as you say, from a groundswell of opinion.
But it's interesting. I was talking to my teenage daughters about this, and I was surprised when they took Depp's part. But it's one thing for teenage daughters to sympathise with him. It's another thing for the studios to say, we can rehabilitate you now. Here's the next picture.
But you see, in many ways, the studios don't exist anymore. Hollywood is over. The great symptom, the great watershed to show that Hollywood, as we envisaged it for decades, is over, was the Weinstein, the imprisonment of Weinstein, because he represented access to Hollywood. That's all completely gone now. Everything is just a hard drive. You know, Netflix, Disney, everything is just a big hard drive. So you're really looking at an economy based on how much attention you can get. I mean, Will Smith, to sort of jump stream, Will Smith will have some kind of comeback as a wellness guru, because it's how much attention you can generate, as opposed to the idea that there is this vertical structure with a studio head at the top deciding what gets made. It's not. It's what can get attention and what can we tag our little adverts onto. We're in the click economy.
Paul Duddridge, absolutely fascinating as ever. Really appreciate your time. Thanks very much. So every day we try. we try to remember to ask our guests which news story has caught their attention. For today's guest, Laura Dodsworth, the new climate change GCSE, which will teach students how to save the planet, is a hot topic. It will be introduced from September 25. Actually, it's called a natural history GCSE, and it's not been completely formulated yet, but we're told it will include subjects like biodiversity and climate change. We'll get Laura's views in a second, but first let's talk to the Deputy Director of Net Zero Watch, Andrew Montford, for his view. Andrew, your view?
We don't need this. The curriculum is awash with environmentalism and climate change already. I wrote a paper on this some years ago, and in almost every subject on the curriculum, you can find reference to climate change and global warming and environmentalism. It's simply not necessary to extend it any further. This does strike me as something that politicians are doing just to try and get some kudos with the environmental lobby. It's not really a useful contribution to anybody's education.
And there'll be people saying, won't they, Andrew, well, hang on, it's a pressing existential problem. Our young people should be told about it. The problem with that is, of course, it's already contained within geography. There's lots of extracurricular stories being peddled by the likes of Greta and all the rest of it. But there's always an opportunity cost, as the people who like to look at these things from a business point of view will say, which is if you are studying natural history GCSE, what about the stuff you're not studying, the really important stuff?
I think that's right. I think the problem is that climate change and global warming in particular are rather subtle subjects which take on, they're much more than natural history. Economics is in there, science is in there, and there is certainly a place to look at these things in the areas. So yeah, if you want to consider the economics of climate change and perhaps issues like whether mitigation makes more sense than adaptation to it, these are good and valid questions. But that's simply not the way the curriculum works at the moment. The curriculum at the moment is written to try to tell children what to think. It tries to frighten children. Because it's this fear, using fear as a tool to manipulate people, which obviously we've known about over the last few years. It's been going on for a long time in climate change, and it's rather sinister in a way. I was shocked when I researched the paper I wrote, because it is so one-sided. There are no questions asked about whether there are different ways of doing things. There's no questions. There's no doubts raised about anything. It's fundamentally religious, if you like.
Andrew Montford, we're going to leave it there because we want to put some of those thoughts to Laura, who came up with the story today. But Andrew, thanks very much indeed. I come back to my point from earlier in a slightly different guise. You don't have to take a GCSE in natural history. Why are we getting so hot under the collar about this?
You don't have to yet. Let's see what happens. For me, it all sounds very kind of cultural revolution. At the moment, climate is very embedded into lots of subjects, and sometimes in a way that omits context and isn't always necessarily super accurate either. I wrote a Substack about it yesterday. I researched some examples from GCSE content right now, which isn't necessarily accurate on climate and its effects. The reason I was so alert to this is last year Nadeem Zahawi said something that was very interesting. He said that education is one of our best weapons in the fight against climate change. So to come out there and describe education as a weapon is something I was attuned to because I just wrote a book, A State of Fear, How the UK Government Weaponised Fear During the COVID-19 Pandemic. It sounds like something straight out of Chairman Mao's playbook. And actually we've heard behavioural scientists from different quarters talking about the social engineering and transformation that will be needed in order to, I think, raise a new generation of little climate foot soldiers. So when I put out this Substack, somebody tweeted me back straight away saying their 3-year-old had been watching a series on Netflix called Rainbow Rangers. I think it's called Rainbow Rangers, and it talked about fracking, about how fracking was really bad and all about making money. Now, what is this if it's not ideological persuasion?
Sounds like
so regardless of where you stand on fracking or anthropogenic climate change, this is about capturing young minds.
And there we leave that story. We'll come back to it on another occasion. Laura Dodsworth, thanks so much for coming in today. Really appreciated your time. And thanks for watching. Thanks for listening. Michelle Dewberry is next. Stand by.
Hello again. Clearing skies overnight will lead to a touch of frost in some places, but after that chilly start, actually Wednesday's looking mostly dry and bright once again, because high pressure is here and it's here to stay for some time. It's building in from the north. Now that means, because winds rotate around high pressure in a clockwise direction, we're seeing an easterly airflow, but actually the isobars are opening out at the same time, so those winds are falling